we have this is a little bit misnamed, or a little bit of a misleading name, because I'm calling this how to choose a paid tax preparer. And I do have a few slides specifically on that, but we have more of this will be about whether or not you need a paid tax preparer, and then even more, the largest portion of this will probably be on how not to choose a paid tax preparer. So most of this will be just things to avoid, but there are some specific sort of positive um, suggestions coming up a little bit later. Starting off in terms of what is a paid to tax preparer, it's an individual or business that charges a fee to help individuals and businesses prepare and file their tax returns. You are required as a business or as an individual to file a tax return each year if you've made a certain amount of money. And these people are paid to help you do that. Next. So what are the roles of them? Um, they can help you gather and organize tax documents. Um, and they're there to help you determine your tax liability and to prepare and file your tax returns. Um, the gather and organize, I probably should have put that sort of into the sometimes. They will be expecting you to get together the documents, and often they will have an organizer that they expect you to work on, but they do need to at least help you with the gathering and organization, in the sense that they should let you know what documents you need to bring them. And then they should have, if they're going to have you organize them, they should tell you how to organize them and give you some sort of method for doing that. And then sometimes they're there to provide some tax advice, and sometimes they will represent taxpayers before the IRS in the event of an audit or other type of issue. The risks of choosing the wrong paid tax preparer: one, you could just get an inaccurate return, which could get you sometimes maybe too much money back, or sometimes not enough. And if you get too much money, you might have to pay that back. The other possibility is fraud. They Sometimes they can be just committing fraud against you. Sometimes it could be committing fraud against the IRS and sort of bringing you into that. Um, there's also the possibility of having to pay high fees or buy unnecessary products. And there's also a possibility, if you get the wrong person, you could have a loss of control, where they sort of take over and present things maybe not wrongly, but perhaps in a way that you would not prefer. Okay, next. So yeah, the preliminary question here is, do I need to hire a paid tax preparer? And so there are alternatives to doing that. The first one is self-preparation. The second alternative is a new alternative, very new, called direct file. I'll describe that a little bit later here. The third one is free software programs. So there are software programs through the Free File program, which I'll talk about later, which is sort of like getting a self-prepared TurboTax or H&R Block Online type of program, but they're free. Another alternative is VITA, the Volunteer Income Tax Assistance Program, or the Tax Counseling for the Elderly program. These are organizations that you can contact, and if you meet their requirements, usually meaning simpler returns, but they can often do just about everyone's returns within a certain amount of income. And they will do your taxes for free. There are dozens of them throughout the Bay Area. Next. So if we're looking at the first option, self-preparation, just you do the taxes yourself, and there are resources that you can use. There's the IRS website, which gives where you can get just about any form you need, as well as guidance on downloading. You can download their many publications for how to prepare taxes on different subjects, and then they also have just question and answer type of guidance on many subjects, and so you can use that. Another way is to buy tax preparation software, which will usually go through some of it. Just kind of is will just let you sort of look at it go into it on your own. Other tax preparation software will go through. They'll have like an automated interview where they're asking you questions, you answer the questions, and then they take all of the information, put it together, and make a and prepare and usually electronically file the return. Sometimes they will have available a certain amount of opportunity to contact a professional, because if you've purchased the software, sometimes that comes with being able to contact a professional, maybe a certain amount of times online, who can answer some of your questions. And then the third, there are plenty of tax guides that you can get. There are paid ones, like there's something called the Master Tax Guide out there, which I think is CCH publishes it. And I think there's like Taxes for Dummies, a book, and then so a lot of different books like that. Or you can just get something like the Pub 17 for free from the IRS, which again, that's something else you can download from the website, a publication that can tell you how to prepare your own taxes. Next. So the really new option here is direct file, which allows you to file your taxes online directly with the IRS. This is not going to like H&R Block Online or TurboTax or whatever. It's not it's going directly to on the IRS website. You make an account with the IRS and you get on their site and you do your taxes right there. This was a pilot program last year that was very successful. I forget the numbers, but they had a plan for how many people they were going to use in the pilot. It was so successful that they expanded it dramatically during the tax season last year. And now this year it is available officially in 25 states, including California. If you're using the direct file, you can often, probably almost always, automatically fill in your W-2 and other information. Most companies that people who have employees were supposed to have already submitted the W-2s to the IRS in the middle of last month. Most of them, almost all of them, did it electronically, probably with only the exception of a few micro businesses that have only one or two employees. They might have filled it out by hand or typed it up and mailed it out, but most of them just sent it electronically to the IRS. In those cases, the IRS already has the information. So when you direct file, the IRS already can just enter it for you, and you don't have to even enter it. It'll be available through October 15th. That's for people who get an extension. So it's due. Well, your taxes are due April 15th. But some people can get an extension if you need to, up to 6 months. And so the direct file will still be available through that. And for California filers, after you file directly with the IRS, they'll provide you with a web link to CalFile, which is the same thing run by the Franchise Tax Board to allow you to directly file your California state taxes with the state of California for free. Next. So like I said, if you're in California, that's one thing that makes you eligible. And I wanted to go through some of the eligibility requirements for direct file so you know if you can use it. If your income includes W-2 wage income, Social Security income, unemployment compensation, interest income, or retirement income, then if it's just those types of income, then you can use direct file. If you have other income, such as self-employment income, like through, if you're self-employed through like Uber or something like that, you're getting, it's a gig economy type of consultant job, where you would be getting a 1099 NEC instead of a W-2, then you cannot use direct file. If you have rental income or you're running a business, you can't use direct file. But if you just have the more basic types of income that are listed here, you can use direct file. Next. As far as deductions, if you have the student loan interest deductions, certain educator expenses, health savings account contributions, and you're just using the standard deduction, you can use direct file. If you need to itemize your deductions, you cannot use direct file. Credits, a lot of these are the basic credits for most people, and also the refundable credits, primarily for low income people. We have the earned income tax credit, child tax credit, the credit for other dependents, child independent care credit, premium tax credit, credit for elderly or disabled, retirement savings contribution credits. So if you have any of those credits, and only those credits, you can still use direct file. If you have other credits that you need to claim, then you will not be able to use direct file. Next. So in addition to direct file, there is free file. It's an online tax preparation and filing service, where the IRS is in partnership with the private sector tax software companies. And it's available to taxpayers with an adjusted gross income of $73,000 or less. You do need to fall. I think there are also sort of some income deduction and credit restrictions. So the more complicated returns, I think, may not be available for free file. Free file is out there, and you can get it through a lot of the companies. Although some of the companies that you'll have to like look that up. It's not something I actually recommend, because I've helped people through it before, and even with the companies that were doing it, it was extremely difficult to use, and they often were trying to you had to be careful, or you'd be guided towards paid programs. They wouldn't automatically help you with a state program. So it's an option, but not one I necessarily recommend, but it's out there. Next. So VITA, this is definitely something I recommend. People making generally about $60,000 or less. There are limits in scope for some of them, for some VITA programs, but not for all of them. So if you have what might be a more complicated return, I would suggest calling the VITA site that you want to go to beforehand, and describing your situation and seeing if they cover that. If not, find another one, because there are some out there that definitely will do very complicated returns, as long as the people meet the income requirements. Also, it's also, if you don't, even if you don't meet the income requirements, sometimes they'll still help you if you have disabilities or you're limited English speaking. There are, like I said, there are dozens of sites around the Bay, about around the Bay Area, with run by a bunch of different organizations. The tax counseling for the elderly is similar, and it focuses on assistance to taxpayers age 60 and older. And so sometimes there are more complicated issues revolving around retirement income, or being over 60, or having certain disabilities that are come with age. And tax counseling for the elderly will usually be able to handle those, since that's their focus population. Um, for both of them, you can go to the IRS website, and the IRS website can help you find some of your local organizations. Just, you can go on a map and tell the location of where you are, and it'll give you a list of nearby VITA and TC sites. Um, just a couple of, just while I'm looking at it, there are a couple of questions about direct file. One asked, does it work if we have dividends or capital gains losses from stock transactions? I think the answer is no to both of those. I'm not sure about the dividends. That seems like, well, I know there are some complicated dividends, so that's probably why it only says interest income. I know definitely capital gains or losses, you will not be able to use direct file. And someone else asked about investment income. Again, mostly no, unless your investment income is all interest income from maybe different sort of bonds, or and things like that, in which case you could probably use it if it's just interest income. But other investment income, no, you would not be able to use direct file. Um, Now, going on to specifically issues regarding paid tax preparers. Again, we're coming up to the portion that I think of more as how not to choose a paid tax preparer. So first here is being aware of the ghost tax preparer. It's someone who hides from the IRS. They don't sign your return. Um, and if they don't sign your return, it's if they charge you and they don't sign your return, it's almost certain that they're carrying out some sort of fraud or a scam, and that's bad for the government, and it's bad for you. Um, uh, Next. So these, so first, here are some rules. Do not, under any circumstances, do. So if a paid tax preparer will not sign their name to the return, do not hire them. Do not do not accept their services. Do not pay them. Do not send in the return. These are rules that protect you. So if they will not sign your return, do not use them. Next. If they mark the return as self-prepared when you paid them to help you, no, that's unacceptable. Do not hire them. Next. If they don't have a P10, a P10 is a preparer taxpayer identification number. It's their number to identify them specifically as a tax preparer, and they're required to list that on the return in the signature area. If they do not have a P10, do not hire them. Next. And then if they ask you to sign a blank return and just say, give me the information, sign the return blank, and then I'll fill it out. No, that is wrong. They are supposed to ethically prepare the return and let you review it before you sign it. So if they're asking you to sign a blank return, do not hire them. Next. These next, I'm calling red flags. Maybe it should have been yellow, but I think of it more as a red flag. It's not don't hire these people, but just be very cautious and maybe look for alternatives before you hire them. Um, so if this is if they're promising you inflated refunds, um, it, in some cases, like if they're promising you a refund that's much greater than what you normally get and your circumstances haven't changed, I would question that a little. They may be right. Maybe you deserve more money than you've been getting back. But just ask them why and get an explanation that you can understand, and before you hire them. Another one is if they request payment before they complete the return. That's not necessarily meaning that they're fraudulent. It may be that they are wary about having done a lot of work for people and then not getting paid, but that's still not best practices. And so it's something I would avoid. Um, Lack of credentials is a red flag. Uh, there are uh, there are certain credentials that they're required to have. I would see make sure that they're a credentialed first. And then another red flag is them asking you to deposit your refund into their bank. Again, this is something that can be useful for you at times. If you use some of their products, like a refund anticipation loan, which I'll explain later, I don't think is a good idea generally. But if you're buying that, then you'll need to send your refund to their bank. If you don't have your own bank and they have a system for getting you the money themselves, you probably need to have it sent to their bank first. These are things that I would definitely avoid if possible. Um, uh, Often it can be an issue. Um, so there can be legitimate reasons for it, but it is generally a bad idea, and it can be used to facilitate fraud. There are cases where tax preparers will claim a much greater refund than they tell the person who's hiring them that they're going to get, and then they have it sent to their bank, and then they only give you what they told you were going to get. So that's a fraud that can happen. Again, there are legitimate preparers who do this, but it's something that I would avoid if possible. Next. Now we're getting into who to who to hire, and so this is the who actually to hire, and what you're looking for mainly is uh, uh, the uh, the the different credentials. So the first one is that if you have CTEC, this is a registration in California for tax preparers. It's good enough for most simple returns. If you don't have a very complicated return, you probably don't need a um, a, a, a an expensive professional. You could hire an expensive professional and they might get you a slightly better refund, but probably not enough to pay for the professional. If it's a simple return. But if you do have a more complicated one, there are three other credentials that can be used. These people do not need to be registered as tax preparers because they can automatically um, they can automatically prepare your returns, and those are enrolled agents, certified public accountants, and attorneys. uh, in these three professionals, um, uh, these are the ones who I would trust to do more than just your tax return. If you need tax advice, um, they can help you. Um, uh, in terms of how to lower your taxes in the future, they're the ones you would go to rather than just a preparer. If you need someone to represent you, again, you would want to be looking at an enrolled agent, a certified public accountant, or an attorney. The preparers who are not one of these three professionals, just like the CTEC, or they can represent you in limited cases involving only the return that they prepared, but that's usually but even that's usually not a good idea. So if you think you're going to need to be represented, you'll want one of the professionals. And I'm highlighting here enrolled agents, because even though enrolled agents, they're not attorneys and they're not CPAs, but what they can do focuses entirely on doing people's taxes and representing the people before the IRS. And they are in my experience, they tend to be as good at this as CPAs or attorneys, but generally they will charge significantly less. Well, let me look at a couple of the questions here. First, how many of these credentials, etc., should one verify early in the process? Um, well, they only need one of the credentials, because if you're looking for a professional, then you need one of those three. If you're not, if you don't need that level of service, then you just need CTEC. And just when you first talk to
Yeah, I think
them,
that's right.
you can ask you can ask for it. If they're an enrolled agent, a CPA, or an attorney, that should be generally they should list that with their name. Um, uh, and because enrolled agent, it'll have EA at the end. CPA, of course, will put CPA, and attorney, they'll tell you an attorney, or they'll have Esquire or something. If you don't see that, you can ask them if they're CTEC registered, and they can tell you, or ideally they should have this CTEC certificate like up on the wall or something, but you may just be talking to them over online. So you can ask them. I would verify that at the beginning. It only needs to be one of the credentials, though. So if they're CTEC, you got it. Um, and how does one determine or estimate how much a tax preparer should be charging? Uh, that, I'll admit, is one I can't give you a really good answer with. Other than to say that one thing you can do is to check out, if you need to go to a paid preparer, um, and you don't need one of the professionals, I would check out the cost of just online preparation, or the software that you can get, and then compare that, and then ask the preparers about um, how much they charge in relation, and then you can compare it to that. But even that's going to be difficult, because the preparers charge based upon what forms they have to fill out, and some forms they'll charge a lot more than other forms, for good reasons. You've got the basic form, and then you've got other forms that they have, and the more forms they need to fill out, the more work they're doing. That makes sense, but knowing beforehand how many forms you're going to need to fill out is going to be very difficult. One thing you might be able to ask them is, if you do have your own business, you might be able to ask them how much they charge for the Schedule C, which is the business, the self-employment income. So the Schedule C and the Schedule SE, which are for the self-employed people, will need to be attached, and those usually cost more than the actual 1040 itself, because business returns that need to be attached. So you can ask them about that ahead of time, but it's going to be difficult for legitimately good reasons to get a good answer prior to having them prepare your taxes. Um, so sorry, it's a long-winded way to say I don't have a very good answer for that particular question. Um, where can one find reviews, if any, of tax preparers? Um, I'm pretty sure, like most professionals, um, they're the online reviews like Yelp and places like that. You can look up and get reviews of what other people have thought. Oh, here, going back to the verifying the credentials, I forgot I have this up here. And you will be able to have access to this, as Jonathan was saying you can you the this presentation, not only is this presentation going to be online, but it should be available, I think, for people who are registered to get copies of the presentation. So you will be able to access these organizations, and you can check online whether or not somebody is credentialed. So there's the organization for people who have the CTEC credential, and so you can verify that. And then enrolled agents. This is the worst one. There's a verifying the status of an enrolled agent on the IRS website. Probably the better way to do it is to just get their name off of the IRS website. It may not be as because the IRS can direct you to EAs, to enrolled agents to help you find one. And if they're directing you to somebody to help you find one, then most likely they have the credential. They definitely had the credential at least at one point, and and they probably still have it. It it may not be as accurate if it takes the IRS a while to take people off of the list. But you can be sure if they tell you then that there's an EA at a certain place, that person at least at one point definitely had the credential. And CPAs and attorneys, you can always look up online to make sure that that they're licensed, and to look over their disciplinary history. And I have the websites for that as well. Next. And so another thing to look at here, to think about when you're hiring a paid tax preparer, is considering the other products, because in addition to just doing your taxes, they'll often try to sell you other things other than just the service of preparing your taxes. And for the most part, I recommend against getting any other products. One of the other products that they often try to sell, the major one they try to sell, are refund anticipation loans. I think I think one company called them rapid refunds, another called it super fast refunds. They have names for these, but they are all refund anticipation loans. There's also something called a refund anticipation check. Um, and not sure why the anticipation is in that one. That one's, I'll talk more about the refund anticipation loan. The refund anticipation check is more for people who don't have a way to, they don't have their own bank account, or they don't necessarily have a reliable way to get a check in the mail from the IRS. So they might have get the check from the tax preparer, the refund check from the tax preparer, but that usually is after the tax preparer gets the money. So the money will go to the tax preparer's bank account, and then the tax preparer will give the check to the taxpayer, usually after taking a bit of a fee for having done that. That one's not a loan though, because they've already gotten the money. Um, some will charge you for filing electronically. That's rare nowadays, but it may still. I know they used to all charge for electronic filing. Now nobody should really charge for that. That should be standard with whatever with the charge for preparing. So I would, if they're going to charge for electronic filing, I would probably go somewhere else. They some of them will also try to sell you audit protection and tax planning services. So uh, audit protection usually means that we'll represent you in the case that your return is audited, and then tax planning, of course, is for planning for the future. I am putting an asterisk beside that because there's um, definitely some people with, particularly with more complicated return issues, do need tax planning. Um, uh, and so, but you want the tax planning to be from a professional, either a CPA, an attorney, or an enrolled agent. And so, even though some people who aren't those professionals will offer tax planning, I would not recommend hiring them. Some of them may be good, but so many of them are not. And just use kind of an automated, here's a bunch of suggestions based on your return that may not have been like analyzed by a real human mind, and they'll just sort of spit out what the computer told them to tell you and then charge you for that. And it's hard to know who's good and whose isn't unless they're an actual professional, again, like an attorney, a CPA, enrolled agent. But so those are people I would hire for tax planning. In terms of audit protection, the same thing. Your tax preparer can help you, can represent you in an audit, usually of that return. It's one of the few things that can actually represent you directly with the IRS, but generally that's a bad idea. I remember talking to someone who did audits, who worked at the IRS and did audits, and they talked about like people, I won't name the company, but one of the biggest tax preparation companies in the country, and who offered audit protection, and they said they loved it when one of them was there, because they would agree with the IRS person all the time and just say, yes, you need to listen to them. So they would show up and just not actually help the people. And so it's not worth getting audit protection from them, because what they offer generally is not worth getting. Again, if you're actually hiring a CPA, enrolled agent, or an attorney to do your taxes, then you can get audit protection from them, because that's one thing they normally do, is helping people in audit situations, and so they can generally then provide you a good service. So again, those last two are okay if you're um, if it's an actual one of the three professionals and not just CTech. More about refund anticipation loans. So it's a short-term loan based on the expected amount of a taxpayer's refund, and they're often offered by some tax preparation firms as a way for taxpayers to access their refund more quickly. So what happens? You come in, they do your taxes. It looks like, oh, you're expecting a $5,000 refund. Tell you what, we can get you $4,500 2 hours from now. So rather than waiting the 6 weeks, whatever it's going to take the IRS to give you the money, we can give it to you 2 hours from now. But of course, they're charging you for this service, and and then also, if it turns out that it was wrong and the IRS and that you shouldn't have gotten that refund, then they'll still come. Then they'll be coming after you to repay them for the loan. Next. So the costs, they're generally expensive fees that can range from a few $100s to $1,000, to more than 1,000. in better than, and more importantly than just thinking about the actual cost, is to think about it as a percentage rate. So the annual percentage rates can range from 300% to over 500%. And the over 500% is something that I saw myself years ago when I was working for a tax preparation company that offered one of these things. And I thought, what? And I sat down and did annualize the interest rate, and yeah, it in many cases was over 500%. Just usury. Next, the risks. You not being approved, so you might not be approved for the loan. They can, there's a better chance of identity theft because they need more information and they have to give it to other people, the banks, third party loan processors. There's a lot of better chances for scams since the money is going to them, and not directly to you, and so there may be chances for them to do things that you're not expecting. And there's also the risk of tax related issues. Again, what I had mentioned, maybe you aren't supposed to be getting this refund, which means that either the refund never comes to them, or maybe it gets delayed and they still want their money back because they were only expecting to have to loan this to you for a few weeks, and when it may take months because the IRS might be wrong and you're fighting the IRS, but the preparation company still wants their money back. So that can cause problems as well. Next. The best way to get your refund is to have it directly deposited to your bank or credit union. You can list your information on the return, and it will go directly into your account. I highlighted credit unions because I generally recommend credit unions. My personal experience is that they can offer pretty much everything a bank can, and almost always cheaper and with less hassle. Next. Okay, for people who don't speak English, I don't think we have anyone here today right now, but if you know anybody and you can talk to them, I would say to bring your own interpreter, such as a family member, so you're not relying on one of their interpreters. And this is true even if the tax preparer speaks your language. And in fact, I would almost say especially if the tax preparer speaks your language. So if you know somebody who doesn't speak English and is going to a preparer who speaks their language, impress upon them to make sure that person is credentialed, etc., and that they're bringing somebody else to help them or interpret, because a lot of the scammers are people who are scamming their own communities. That's true in all communities. But it's especially true in more vulnerable communities. So members of their community, they speak their language and they get the trust and they violate that trust. I have seen that so many times. And so I want to make sure, talk to anybody else. If you know they don't speak English and they want to go to somebody who speaks their language, that's understandable, but make sure they are very careful about who they're hiring. Next. If you are a victim of fraud, you can report fraudulent preparers to the IRS. They have a form for that. You don't have to remember the form. You can look it up on the IRS. Next. In addition to filling out a form about that, you may have to write up an affidavit. They have a form for doing an affidavit explaining what happened to you. Now, finally here, just a little bit about us. Hudit and I run the Low Income Taxpayer Clinic. These are clinics, they're a national program funded by the National Taxpayer Office, National Taxpayer Advocates Office. We provide free representation and advice to low-income tax preparers before the Internal Revenue Service in audit appeals, collections, and before the federal court in matters of tax litigation. We receive some matching funding from the IRS via grant program, but we are completely independent of and not associated with the federal government. And each clinic independently determines if a prospective client meets the income or poverty guidelines and other criteria before we agree to represent. Next. We also help ensure the fairness and integrity of the system by, again, providing the free representation, by educating taxpayers about their rights and responsibilities, which I'm doing right now, and by identifying and advocating for issues that impact low-income tax preparers. In addition to providing free representation, we also provide free advice. With the representation, we have strict income guidelines. With advice, we do not. We can provide advice on individual income tax matters to anybody, regardless of their income. So next, you can see we have an intake line here and an email. If you have any income tax related questions, you can send them to us, and we can provide you advice for free. So that's one thing, particularly if you want to do the taxes on your own, you might come up with questions, you can ask us. Let me see. A friend just received an IRS refund check for tax year. Okay, so a person wrote, a friend just received an IRS refund check for tax year 2023, but he actually had to pay taxes due for 2023. Should he still deposit the refund check? I would say not immediately, and I would suggest calling us. Again, we can provide advice. Even if we do not represent you, we can provide advice. I would not want to give you an answer. There's a lot of different questions that could come in as to whether or not he should deposit it, whether he should deposit it. I don't know. I would need to get a lot more specifics, which means I would need to talk to them directly and ask them questions. I would just say no until they get advice, and you can call us for free advice. I don't know if we're out of time.
Yeah, it's a little bit after 1 o'clock. Doesn't look like there are any more questions in the Q&A window. Yeah, I'd like to thank you, Tim and Hudit, for being here today with us. That was a very helpful presentation. I know that this can be a stressful time of the year for folks. So this is really great information that will hopefully take a little bit of the pressure off as people decide how to proceed with their tax return this year. And thank all of our participants who showed up today. It's one of our first sunny days in a while here in San Francisco, so thanks for being with us. There's also a lot of other activities going on in the city today, so we're happy you were able to join us today. Please keep an eye out for a follow-up email from me later today that'll include a link to a recording of this presentation, a copy of the slideshow, and a short evaluation survey, which I posted a link to that in the chat. Please take a moment to fill that out. It really helps us as we develop new programs and try to improve our events. So again, thank you so much, Hudit and Tim. We hope to have you back soon for another informational program to help people approach their taxes and tax situation.
Okay, thank you. There's a couple more questions. I just want to just say one. I can't recommend in anybody specific. The one thing I can do is that we have in Roseville. I know where that is. That's actually where my parents live, so I know it's not the Bay Area. But if you're looking for somebody in the Bay Area, you can contact the lawyer information and referral service, LRIS, run by the Bar Association of San Francisco, and they can give specific referrals. For grant and professional reasons, I can't give a referral, but they can. And then someone wants to know the differences, how to know if you have a complicated return or not. I would say look at the direct file requirements. Basically, if you meet the direct file requirements, I would say you have a simple return. If you don't, I would say it's a more complicated return.
All right. Seeing a couple of thank yous in the chat and the Q&A. Yeah, we're gonna end this meeting now. Thank you again to our presenters and everyone who joined us today.
Thank you for having us. We enjoy this.
Oh, our pleasure. Yeah, we'll have you back
Thank
soon.
you.
Good.
All right, everyone, enjoy the rest of your Saturday.
Thank you.
Take care.